I'm going to nag so that they're annoyed. So they don't want to talk to me anymore. So they ignore me. That's not the goal here. And yet that is the outcome of nagging.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life in marriage? Let's dive in.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's been coming up a lot with my clients lately, which is how can I communicate with my husband when it seems like he's not listening, right? How can I communicate without becoming a nag? Or if you're already nagging, how can I stop? Okay. Like, we all know that nagging has a very negative connotation. No one ever wants to be called a nag. They don't want to see themselves as a nag. And so I'm going to share with you why we nag in the first place, what triggers the nagging, what our intentions are behind it, the impact that nagging has, and some simple actionable things that you can do to shift your nagging back into effective communication, back into connection, so that you can request the support that you need and have a better chance of having a favorable response without it breaking your marriage into a cycle of resentment, into a cycle of not wanting to connect and hang out, and basically teach you how to communicate when you do have a need that isn't being met. Okay. So first, let's start off with acknowledging that nagging is a very common struggle in marriage. Okay. Especially after you have kids. You are well aware of the exponential growth of responsibilities as soon as they become parents. And I want to mention that typically it's women that are being called nags. And I just want to put it out there that there are men that do it, okay? And the men that do nag, it does cause resentment in their marriage. So if you are finding yourself nagging a lot in your marriage, totally common, okay? And I'm going to help you stop and find other ways to approach these concerns and challenges that you are having in your marriage. And we're going to talk about what you can do as a wife to navigate yourself out of nagging. And I want to mention, historically, women are more likely to nag because of what the generations before have demonstrated to us, have taught us in subtle ways and not so subtle ways that we are responsible for managing the home and family life. So we have been taught to keep tabs on everything and everyone related to home life. And so we have our radar and it is loud and we notice stuff. We feel the need to fix it or deal with it because it's our responsibility. And so when we ask for something and we don't get the support that we need and we're getting burned out and we find ourselves having to ask repeatedly and not getting the results that we want, things get worse and resentment forms. And then once resentment builds, our desire to connect physically, emotionally starts to fall. And that's when the marriage starts to feel rocky, because then they notice that you've changed and they're not getting what they need because you're not getting what you need. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. We start to feel resentful. And when resentment builds in a marriage, we start to treat each other differently, right? We have less of a desire to connect physically. We have less of a desire to be kind and compassionate and patient and have fun and be open to flirting. And then the marriage starts to fall apart and get rocky. It becomes a co-parenting roommate situation where maybe there's even some tension in the relationship. And so in this episode, I'm going to provide you some simple, actionable strategies to help you shift from nagging back to effective communication so you can clearly communicate what it is that you are needing and how to manage it if they still don't follow through. Okay. So let's understand the nature of nagging, like what triggers it and what are our intentions behind it? Why do we nag? So what ends up triggering nagging is feeling unheard, feeling overwhelmed, feeling unsupported, feeling like things aren't going the way we need them to in order for us to feel like life is going smoothly. Okay. And so our intention behind nagging is usually coming from a place of being loving, helpful, supportive, right? Like the reminders, the not wanting to let them fail you as a partner, not wanting to let them forget because you want them to show up for you, because you want them to share in the responsibility of taking care of the home and the family, not from a place of annoyance, right? Like your intention is not to annoy. And yet, that is usually how it's interpreted. And so the issue behind nagging is that it gets misinterpreted as criticism, as control, and it leads to defensiveness and resentment instead of action, instead of them stepping up to support you. And so we don't want any of that, right? We want to motivate them to take action. We want to motivate them to support us. And so before I get into the strategy behind how we can shift the nagging into effective communication, let's talk about the impact that nagging can have on your relationship. So nagging can lead to your husband feeling criticized and wrong and like he cannot do anything right or that he is enough for you. And when people feel like they are failing at things, or when they are not getting anything good out of your interactions together, they're going to eventually tune you out, or they're going to fight back and get defensive. None of the things that you want out of your conversation with them, right? That's not the goal that you walk into thinking, okay, well, I'm going to nag so that they're annoyed, so that they don't want to talk to me anymore, so that they ignore me, right? Like that's not the goal here. And yet that is the outcome of nagging, right? And so with this environment, it starts to create tension instead of teamwork, instead of partnership, which is your goal, okay? So because we are so focused on the task at hand that's not being done, or the lack of support that's not being done, instead of what it is that you are wanting, it's very clear to them that you are purely focusing on the negative and you're viewing them in a negative light. And I don't know about you, but I've had micromanagers and I always perform worse when I have a micromanager. I don't know what it is, but it's like if I had the freedom and I was spoken to with more respect and I knew that I was valued as a contributing member, I would perform much better than being criticized, having all my mistakes pointed out to me, not tactfully. Okay. And so nagging can be a very slippery slope because once you get into the cycle of nagging, it's really difficult to get out of it because it almost changes and molds the way we communicate with our spouse going forward. You suddenly find yourself fixated on nagging and criticizing and nitpicking, and we start to notice more easily the things that they're doing wrong, the things they're not doing enough of. And so it changes our perspective in an unhealthy way where we do become that micromanager. We do see all the things that they're doing wrong. And it's like getting that essay back in school with so many red marks from your teacher because the feedback being given isn't being given tactfully or with the respect for you and your feelings as a person, because the feelings of the person who is so frustrated, upset, over not getting the support that they need is overriding the validity of what might be the reason why those things aren't happening, or how you feel as a person that's receiving that message of nagging and criticizing and possibly judgment, right? And so nagging can be detrimental in your relationship, because once you enter into that negative mindset about your partner, then there's always going to be something that you're going to find, because we're human. We are constantly making mistakes. Let's turn the tables around here, and let's say that your husband started to nitpick you and notice every single wrong thing that you do. Here's a very clear example. I have a couple that I'm working with now, and in the practice of expanding their trust for each other, the wife has handed off the job of taking care of the cats to the husband to show her that he can be trusted, that he can be relied on, because he believes that. But because of her history, she needs proof. And so we're trying to build proof by taking baby steps to establish that line of trust, so she can have more examples that, oh, I can trust him. I don't have to believe everything that my mind is trying to convince me because of previous relationships. And so we had to say, we need to be very clear about when this is happening, and you need to train him on what's important about taking care of these cats, so that when it's fully transferred to him and he owns that task, you can wash your hands clean and you will not nag him. You will have to practice patience around how he's doing things, because he doesn't have to do it your way. And he will have to communicate, okay, because this is a trust exercise, I'm going to have this done by this time every day. And if that time was not communicated, she could just be staring at the cats all day long, being someone that works from home, and be like, well, he still hasn't done it. He still hasn't done it. He still hasn't done it. He still hasn't done it, right? But really, in his mind, all along, he's going to do it at 7 o'clock at night. And so can you imagine waking up and just constantly noticing that he's not doing something that he said he was going to do, because there was no clarity around when he was going to do it? And so she could easily be at 6 o'clock, you haven't done it, and start nagging him. And he will grow resentful, because he's like, what the hell? I already had this on my calendar to do at 7 o'clock, and you didn't even give me the chance. So that breaks the level of trust both ways. And we don't want to do that, right? Because the mindset then becomes a negative habit, and it's very challenging to break out of, and can do a lot of harm to your relationship, because your husband's not going to feel appreciated. He's going to feel like he's being constantly attacked. He's going to feel criticized. And the effort that he does put in isn't being acknowledged, because you are hyper-focused on noticing the things he's not doing, and maybe even not noticing the things that he is doing. And so our perspective can be very skewed depending on what we are focusing on, okay? If you've been listening to the show for a while, or even if you've worked with me before, you know, if we have it in our minds that our husbands are not supportive, our mind is going to continuously feed us with examples of how he's not supportive. And guess what happens to the times he is being supportive? We don't notice them, because we are just focused on him not being supportive. And so we want to make sure that we exit out of that cycle, because we don't want to create resentment. We don't want our husbands to feel like they're not valued or appreciated or acknowledged, okay? And if you're over here saying, hey, I'm not being valued or acknowledged, that is a different topic. We don't want to allow pettiness to enter the chat, okay? Because when we do that, it then negates the validity of how you each feel. You can also feel like your effort is not being acknowledged and you are not being valued. But that doesn't mean that you then go devalue him as a spouse and don't acknowledge what he's doing. Okay? What do we tell our kids, right? Like my middle son and my daughter, thankfully they don't fight as often now, but before they did. And, you know, sometimes my son can get into it where he gets petty. And I'm like, why don't you just let her get in trouble on her own? Why do you choose to join her? She's 4. Okay? So yeah, she might have done something that you didn't like. You set a boundary and she crossed it. let her get in trouble by herself. Don't go and do something because you're angry, right? There's a difference between thinking of doing something and then actually doing it, right? And so feeling petty, can't control it. Acknowledge that you're feeling petty. Acknowledge that you wish you could be petty. But when it comes to how we decide to act on that pettiness, we have to think long term. Is this in support of the marriage that I'm trying to create? Because when we act outside of that, when we're not aligned with the kind of relationship that we want with our spouse, that's when we start to create more evidence on both sides of why we are validated in how we are behaving, right? Not wanting to hang out, not being kind, not being patient, being petty, being frustrated, being resentful. We want to work our way out of that. Okay? We want to work through all that stuff, not add on more fuel to the fire of my marriage is in a rocky place. Okay? So if you are finding that nagging has gotten out of control in your marriage, here is what you can do. The key is clear and calm communication. Okay? So what does that look like? Being direct, not repetitive. Say what you need once and say it clearly. Okay? I'm going to say this until I'm blue in the face. You must be aware and clear on what it is that you are wanting before you go and talk to him, before you make the request. If you are vague and he's not the kind of person who's like, okay, I have a million questions to make sure I'm getting this right, you might be disappointed. And if you're going to be disappointed and blame it on him and put it on him, we cannot do that. Okay? Because if you go send your husband to go get apples and you don't say what kind of apples, and you know that there's like a million types of apples, you cannot get mad at him for coming home and being like, you got the wrong apple, when you never clearly stated. Now, can he ask you what kind of apple? Sure. But do they always know to ask? Maybe not. Because I learned that there are lots of different kinds of people out there, right? There are people who are very clear on what they want, but sometimes don't clearly communicate that. And when they don't get what they want, they feel disappointed because they are very specific about what it is that they had in mind. And then there's people who are very, very go with the flow. And if you get them the wrong apple, it's like, okay, whatever. You know, you did your best. Now I know next time to specify, or they really don't care that it's not exactly what they need. They're just very grateful that you did it, that you went to the store and got the apple. Okay. If you are the former, then you need to work on being really clear. You need to help them be set up for success. All right. So being direct means not beating around the bush, not insinuating you need support, but like straight up saying, hey, I need support. I'm drowning here. So these are the things that I do on the daily basis. These are things that are really overwhelming for me. Which of these can you take on so that I can lighten my load and feel like I'm not constantly treading water, because I want to stop being a stress case in the family. Okay. That's being direct. So that kind of leads me into the second one, because I used this already in the example that I just shared, is using I statements, right? You're going to talk about yourself. You're not talking about him. People don't do well when you start pointing the finger by saying, you did this, you didn't do this. You are, fill in the blank with whatever adjective you are feeling like they're being like, right? Instead, talk about what you know to be true, which is your experience, how you feel, not your husband. You don't know his motivations. You don't know his priorities. You don't know his thoughts, his load. Like, you do not understand where he's at right now. Is he stressed out? Is he good to go? Can he take on more? What are his feelings about all of this? You have no idea, right? So you can only bring yourself to the table, which is, hey, I'm drowning right now. And I realize that I don't like how I've been behaving lately at home, which is like super cranky, short with you, unavailable to connect with you. I notice that you're joking with me, and instead of playing along, I'm feeling angry and annoyed by it, and I don't want to be that person anymore. And so I realized that in order for me to be that person again, I need help so that I can feel like we're in this together. Or I realized that I need help, whether that's hiring someone to help with this or us taking this on together. Either way, I need my load lightened. Okay. Versus you never help and now I'm da 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 da. And, like it's just, no, let's not do that. Okay. That starts a fight. We don't want to fight. We just want solutions, right? We want support. And so we have to keep in mind, what is the goal that we have for this conversation, for this request? And how can we shape this conversation so that it's productive, so that it doesn't escalate into this fight about who does more and stuff gets brought up and people regret what they say and then feelings get hurt and the marriage suffers. We don't need that drama. Okay? The other thing to remember is timing. This is huge. Okay? Pick the right moment to have this conversation. Don't talk to him when he's busy doing something or distracted. Don't try and talk to him when football's on. Don't try to talk to him when basketball's on. Don't try and have a serious conversation the second he walks in from work. Okay? Or when he's watching TV. It might seem like a really great opportunity because he's obviously doing nothing. But you know what? When men watch TV or decide to do anything, they are focused on doing that one thing. Okay? They are not like women. Women are like spread out all over the place. It's like, oh, we can be interrupted at any second. And that's another conversation for us to have about boundaries and respecting your own time. But we have to check in to see if they're available to have that conversation. It's like consensual conversations. Okay? We need to receive consent before we go on, because that is a critical part of having a successful conversation, especially when you're talking about something that's challenging about how things are going and you want something to change. Okay? So you could just like drop a notice like, hey, when you have some time today, I would really like to sit down and talk because I'm noticing that what we're doing here, how we're splitting up stuff is not working for me. And I want to work together to figure out how we can improve things. Okay. So you can give him a little snippet of what you want to talk about so he can process and decide when's a good time, because he now knows, okay, this is not going to be a short conversation. Or you could be like, hey, is now a good time to talk? I wanted to talk about some things that I've been noticing about myself and needing more support at home. Cool. Okay. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind is how you are framing the conversation. You already know that you need to focus on sharing your experience and what you need and what you feel, not about making assumptions of what his intentions are, why he is not doing something, and talking about him. Okay? You need to frame things also from the lens of teamwork. So using the word we is so, so powerful. Okay? How can we make sure this gets done? Now, as women, because we are used to owning a bunch of stuff at home, I want you to switch that language, right? Let's say the kid's bedtime is like especially trying for you, and for some reason you are doing it by yourself. You could say, hey, I want to figure out how we can do bedtime differently because the way we're doing it right now isn't working. Or, hey, I want to figure out how we can have more peaceful dinners with the kids. How can we do this? If you want partnership, talk about it as if it's a partnership. Okay? Don't own it by using I language in that instance. Use the word we. So that way he already knows, like, oh, I'm a part of this. Especially if he hasn't had an example growing up of how husbands and how fathers are supposed to be. This is a great mindset shift so that he's like, oh, I'm included in this conversation. I am an equal partner in this. I am going to partake in coming up with solutions and also change behavior. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to mention is something that I offer my clients when I notice that they're getting into a negative mindset. They find themselves in nagging mode and they are being flooded with all these like negative thoughts about their spouse, about how they're not good enough, how they're not supportive enough, how much they're messing up. And it's just effortless, all of these examples. Okay. But if you notice that you're in this mode, the only way to get out of it is to make a conscious effort to make space for ways that he is already supportive of you. How is he already the kind of husband that you want? He might not be 100% how you want him to be, but how is he showing you in little ways that maybe you weren't paying attention to, right? So it's all about balancing those thoughts. Like, yeah, you might be right. He might not be taking the trash out reliably. He might not be helping the kids with homework all the time or as much as you. But if you are wanting an equal partner in this home and family life, can you also notice the times that he is doing it, right? Can you balance it out so that you have a more accurate or closer to accurate perspective of what's all happening? And the reason why this is so important is because when our minds are set to that thought, like I said earlier, it's going to keep flooding you with examples, right? And when we sit in that, it becomes very toxic. And we start to speak in extremes, like you never, you always, rather than sometimes or a lot of times, okay? Because it's not black and white. I'm sure there has been things that he's been doing that have been supportive to you, but maybe it's not the right things. Or maybe you have just accepted that that's status quo and you stopped appreciating him doing it. Okay, so those are my tips for you. Now, I want to mention this next piece just in case for those of you who are like, but what if I do all this and he doesn't follow through? Here's what you can do. You can check for clarity. Was he clear on what you were asking for and why it matters to you? Does he understand why you need it done? And then you can also follow up with curiosity instead of frustration. Like, hey, I noticed that the trash wasn't taken out last night. Did you get hung up with work? Like you can offer examples, whatever. Don't jump into blaming. Okay. And this is true for how we communicate with our kids as well, right? I wasn't so great at this in the beginning of my motherhood journey. And that's because I wasn't taught how to communicate while keeping the other person in mind. And this is something that I actively have to work on because my feelings were taken into consideration when I did something wrong. And so the strategy wasn't passed down when it came to healthy communication. And now I'm having to figure out, okay, well, how do I do this and not blame it on the person and just like solve the problem, right? Make the problem, not the person that you're talking to the problem. Okay. And so that is a really great approach so that it leaves them a chance to say, oh, shoot, I forgot. I started working on this and I completely forgot. And it brings in that compassion and humanity into the conversation because you're like, oh, yeah, I've done that before. I totally get it. And how do I make sure that the trash gets taken out? And then you guys can problem solve it. Oh, I'll put a reminder on my phone or, I'll put it out earlier. Or I'll put Post-its. It doesn't matter how they remember. It's just you showing up saying, hey, how can we figure this out together? Because I'm here with you. I'm not here to make you feel bad about this. I just want it changed. Okay. Another thing is you let natural consequences play out. So instead of forcing things through control by talking about it, making him feel bad, et cetera, you allow the impact to be felt. Like if he forgets to take the trash out, then he has to handle the mess. Don't be so quick to save him. Okay. I know it gets uncomfortable because it's impacting you. But when you fix things and do things on their behalf, you are enabling it because you train them to think, oh, if I forget, she's going to take care of it. Okay. And he's not going to think anything of it Meanwhile, you are stewing. The resentment is building. You must let the consequences play out, okay? And make him deal with it. If things pile up for him, okay, that was his consequence. Like, that is life. And the same goes for our kids, right? It's like, if your child forgets their lunch at home and they're old enough, right? Let's do age appropriate stuff. Then they're going to go hungry or they're going to have to pay for lunch. We are not responsible for what people do. And so we should also not be responsible for paying for their mistakes. We can support them, but we don't have to be responsible for fixing every single person's problem. It's already a full-time job just managing ourselves and our mistakes and our growth and our goals, okay? So I release you from taking on responsibility that isn't yours, okay? The next thing is talking about expectations. Is the thing that you have asked for a priority for both of you? Or did you ask him to do something that he doesn't understand the value of and he doesn't agree? This can open up for a really great conversation where maybe you guys need a compromise, or maybe you need to shift some things if it's important to you, but it's not important to him and he really doesn't want to do it for some reason, then maybe you do it and he does something else. And of course, if you're noticing that follow through is a pattern, then have a bigger conversation about it, right? Address it calmly, focusing on teamwork rather than blame, so that he knows that you're not there to attack him and make him feel bad, but rather you're just here to solve a problem. You're needing partnership. Things are not working out well. So it's like a team meeting. It's like, okay, here's the problem. How can we figure this out together? So can you start to incorporate more of a team mentality to all the things that aren't going your way in the relationship, but also to celebrate all the things that aren't going well? Okay? Morale is also important in your marriage, not just at workplaces, not just in sports teams, but in family life too. It helps when people know that they're valued. It helps when people know that their efforts are appreciated. And when feedback is given, it's constructive and coming from a loving, compassionate place. Okay? So, quick recap. Recognize what's triggering you to want to nag. Shift your communication style. Focus on teamwork and handle follow-through patterns and disappointment with curiosity and natural consequences. Okay? So my invitation to you is this week, I want you to start to try some of these things that we discussed and see what changes. Okay? And as always, if you try something, let me know how it turns out. And if you know someone that needs to hear this episode, share it with them. And if you love this show, I would so appreciate it if you leave a rating and review. It helps people just like you find the show and get the support that they need to have the marriage and kind of motherhood that they deserve and that they want. Okay? Well, that's all I have for you today, and I'll catch you back here on the next episode. Bye.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.